Hi guys, it's Vanessa coming to you from Central Texas in Zone 9A, just northwest of Austin in the suburbs, in the Cedar Park Leander area. It is the time of year where you're itching to get a lot of things planted out in the garden, but it's not time yet. Although it's 75 degrees and sunny, I'm legit sweating right now. Just a few weeks ago, it looked like this outside. And in a few days, it's going to be lows in the teens. And I'm specifically talking to you guys down in San Antonio and the Houston area who should have been safe to start planting things outside now. But it looks like, based on what I'm seeing online, that you are going to get some temps that are below freezing as well. I'm going to walk you through what it looks like for me to decide what I'm stressed about covering in my late February garden, what I'm going to try to preserve, how I'm going to cover it, and to the degree I am going to attempt to cover certain things based on my experience of dealing with this yearly one-time super extreme dip that we get, which honestly should bring our zones a little bit colder with that average low temp. But alas, it doesn't, because we have enough warm nights to bring that average up. Speaking of growing zones, I have seen a lot of brand new gardeners who are very confused about what a growing zone is and when it is applicable for deciding how and what you're going to plant, but it's not applicable when it comes to knowing when to plant. The way that USDA growing zones are calculated is based on the average lowest temp that your general area experiences every year in the winter months. That, for me, used to be zone 8B, which was average temps of about 19 to 20 something degrees, which then let me know what perennial plants I could plant outside safely in the ground. And if they experience that level of cold, the chances are, if they're a healthy plant, they will go into dormancy during the winter and they'll come back for me in the spring. That is the only thing that a growing zone tells you. The growing zones are calculated on a 30-year rolling average. That 30 years is updated every 10 years. So every 10 years, they take a look at the past 30 years worth of data and they average those nighttime lows based on the specific areas of the regions that they have kind of calculated have differing temperatures in the low temperatures for the winter. Recently, we had an update, which was really big and a lot of people didn't know about because a lot of gardeners have started gardening in the last 4 to 5 years. I think we all know what might have impacted a lot of gardeners to start in the last 4 to 5 years. But for them to have a growing zone that got updated was something completely new to them because they just learned what a growing zone was in the last few years. So when I say I'm in growing zone 9A, I used to be in growing zone 9B. It doesn't mean I moved. It just means that we've had enough warmer winter weather to where it shifted those average numbers to show that we are on average a little bit warmer when we get super, super cold. Does this mean that I went out and bought a bunch of tropical plants that are meant for zone 9 and I thought they were going to thrive? No, because this next Wednesday, we are going to get down to about 16 to 19 degrees in the Central Texas area. And if you're anywhere in the DFW Dallas area, you're going to get much colder than that. So it's important to know that no matter what you're getting, if you're going to use a growing zone to decide what plants to put in your garden, it's only going to affect the perennials, which are a lot of like fruit trees and fruit plants and some of those herbs and perennials that die back and come back every year. But you also may want to get perennials that are cold hardy to zones that are above your zones. So when I say above, I mean I'm in zone 9 and I shoot for ones that are cold hardy for zones all the way up to like zone 5, because the lower the number, the kind of colder it is in those zones. That way I have a good margin to where if it gets down to single digit degrees, my plants have a better chance of coming back. So if you're wondering what it looks like to have perennials growing in the wintertime, this is what it looks like. Yarrow is an evergreen perennial and it grows as a ground cover. As you can see, it's covered pretty well down here. And then I have some pretty decrepit looking blackberry vines growing along the fence. And then I have comfrey, which is kind of dying back and coming back over and over again in a cycle because of the weather. And then I have a fig tree, a vitex tree that really shouldn't be here, and a white mist flower, along with some different wildflower seeds that are popping up. But the majority of these plants are perennials. They are all rated to be able to withstand really, really cold weather. I'm not really concerned with covering these with big sheets or blankets with this type of weather that's coming. I will, however, be concerned with protecting the root zone, which is what's inside the soil and at the base of the plant going into the soil. So I will be using a lot of chopped straw and any mulch I can get my hands on to make sure that they are deeply watered, which insulates the roots during a hard frost, and covered really well at the root zone. This area looks a little bit junky because I have have some things already covered, but that's because I'm actually killing off some of a cover crop over here on the end to plant some potatoes, and we'll get to that in a second. But along this pathway, there's a mix of perennials and garlic planted, and I am just going to make sure that everything is deeply mulched and deeply watered once again in this area. But right behind me here, I actually have some bulbing onions planted. Bulbing onions should be planted in January, if not a little bit sooner, but they cannot take a super hard frost. So let me show you one of the things I've been naturally allowing to happen to help me with that insulation and how I will be covering them to make sure they're protected during this really cold dip. As you can see here, I have henbit that is growing in between my bulbing onions. And you would think that this is competing for a lot of nutrients and slowing down the bulbing onions, but as it stands right now, it's acting as a living mulch. You can see over here where I have some bulbing onions that I have a lot of leaf litter mulch put in here already to help with some of these really cold dips we've been getting. But I will be adding a little bit more straw, and I just ended up leaving this tomato cage and this rigged PVC setup because I'll be throwing a couple blankets on top of here, as well as adding a little bit of mulch. And then I will go through and thin out this henbit as we get closer into the spring, just to make sure my bulbing onions have enough sunlight and energy to get to the full bulbing stage. Now, the next most important thing to know is when to plant your white potatoes, because in other videos, I've talked about planting white potatoes on Valentine's Day. And as I'm standing here filming this right now, it's after Valentine's Day, and no, I have not planted my potatoes because I started seeing rumblings about this really hard dip, this polar vortex destabilization that is potentially on its way for this following week, right before Valentine's. So instead of spending the day getting ready to plant my potatoes, I decided to hold off because 1 week in really cold weather is not going to give you as big of a head start as you think. They're going to lay dormant and maybe throw down a root or two, if even that. So if you wait about a week to a week and a half to get out your white potatoes, they're just going to grow a little more sprouts inside that look like this, and then you can get them outside. So here's what I'm doing in the area of my garden to get ready for planting those potatoes. I'm doing some potatoes in containers, but I'm also doing some in kind of a mound on the ground in an area that I did a cover crop of Elbon rye and Kodiak brown mustard over the winter time, which I'm terminating with a tarp. And I'm going to dump a little bit of mushroom compost on top of this, sprinkle some broken up mushroom blocks in there, and then go ahead and plant my potatoes underneath straw, probably by next weekend. I've got some white potatoes that are sprouting pretty well. This one's just getting going. These are not going to go outside until after that frost. And speaking of holding off on planting things that you might normally plant right now, planting things like a young fruit tree or a young perennial should just be held off on doing for at least just 7 days, right? It's the same concept. You're not going to get a lot of extra growth in the root system of that plant if you put it in now, with the gift of knowledge that we have with modern technology, knowing that it's going to be really freaking cold this next week. So just hold off a week or so and you should have a really good chance at planting. Now, I know the urge to cut back dead, ugly growth on some of these perennials in your garden is really strong. Trust me, it bothers me too. But dead growth is a really good insulator for that new young growth that you're seeing here in this shot. So I encourage you to leave the dead growth. Even if you're going to trim some of it, just use it as mulch on your perennials. It will help protect during this really deep frost. Protecting young wildflower sprouts is going to be a little more difficult just because they're really tender, but this is some of my in-bed area, the cottage garden area. I have poppies and calendula growing, and those will be getting some frost cloth and mulch on top. This area is where I decided to throw some cardboard down this year and plant some wildflowers. So I actually have a bluebonnet coming up, and a lot of folks are starting to see their bluebonnets come up if they aren't already up. So all I'll be doing with all these baby sprouts, because they're pretty tender, but I want them to get established in time to bloom early for the spring, is taking a really thick layer of straw and potentially just one layer of frost cloth and using these pavers to hold it all down just for a few days. So I've talked a lot about perennials and wildflowers, but let's talk about vegetables. This is my raised bed garden, and these are side shoots that have grown off of the heads of broccoli that I harvested about a month ago. So I'm going in and I'm harvesting anything that I see that's edible like this. I will leave some of that kale. I'll leave some cilantro. That way, if the outer edges of things freeze and burn, then I have something left. I'll be covering the cilantro though, and then I have this beautiful Romanesco that's just starting to give off head, so I might throw a cardboard box over it. And the bees are loving my bolted broccoli. This calendula is off on its own. I've just been throwing a 5-gallon bucket over it when we get like a super hard frost, and that's been doing fine. Now in the center of my garden is kind of a young perennial bed, And it does have some annual herbs like dill, and this dill went to seed and I just dumped the seeds right next to the plant to resow that for the spring. But there's things like catnip and thyme and rosemary and oregano, and they're going to get a light covering, but they don't need too much covering. Now, established carrots are fine. Young baby sprouts, they would need a covering, and my celery should do okay, but I am invested in these Brussels sprouts, so I might give them a little bit of covering. And all of these things have been grown in these Garden in Minutes raised beds with these matching irrigation grids. I know you guys hear me talk about them a lot, but I rebuilt my entire raised bed kitchen garden this year. And the fact that I've gotten so much production out of it just in the fall season and winter season has been awesome. So this is what it looked like when I was first installing the grids. Literally, it's a plug and play situation, and then you just adjust where it's spraying at first, and that's it. It just like total perfect soaking. I only have to run irrigation for like literally a minute, maybe 2 minutes sometimes, and everything's good. And you can toggle it. They have all the connectors, everything. So if you're interested, I will have the discount code and the link in the description of this video below. But yeah, I stand by the Garden in Minutes products. They're a Florida-based company. They're a small family-owned business, and it's really been a game changer for me. Now I have some mustard green cover crop in my cottage garden area, as well as a bunch of borage that reseeded, and that's chamomile underneath that covering that is about to bloom. It's pretty frost hardy, but I want to protect it a little bit during this really hard dip. And then I have a lot of borage, to be honest with you. It's a lot of borage, but I also have some bulbs that are coming up like ranunculus, so those are getting covered, and I snuck some food over here, so I'll be harvesting that as well. But let's get into the container garden side of things. This is just an inexpensive low-lying greenhouse, and then I've been overwintering peppers, and they're starting to resprout, and then I have a Meyer lemon and a key lime inside of here, as well as some longevity spinach and some tropical plants. Now my green stalk vertical planters, I'm actually going to take apart one of these and put it in half and half height into the greenhouse. Even though strawberries are pretty tolerant of the weather, they're young strawberries. Now, this garden tower though, it's full of garlic, so I'm not too worried about it. Now this tower doesn't come apart very easily, and so I would not even attempt to do that. It's called the Garden Tower 2, but it is nice and sturdy and keeps a good amount of warmth because of how much soil it actually holds. So what I like to do is wrap this in incandescent Christmas lights and then put a sheet and then a tarp bungee corded around it, and I have had a lot of success getting through really, really cold weather using that method with this tower. Now, a lot of my blueberries are still pretty young and in smaller pots, but they benefit from the warmth of the side of my house, and I think that's why they're flowering a little bit early as well. But I'm concerned about these blooms getting frost damage, so I will be covering them pretty decently. This is my orange tree, my Hamlin sweet orange tree. That's pretty substantial. As you can see, the trunk is pretty healthy. I've been using the MicroLife citrus fertilizer with it, and it's been doing super well. Covered in oranges. And as you can see, it's a little too big to go in my small greenhouse. So this guy just comes inside like a houseplant and goes underneath a grow light or by my kitchen kind of bay style window just for a few days. And then it goes right back outside as soon as the temps are a little bit in the higher 30s or low 40s. This is a bare root plum tree that I just got from HEB this last week. It is an Arosa plum. It has low chill hours, so it doesn't need to experience too many hours that are below 45 degrees. I leave it outside for the most part so it can get enough chill hours, because stone fruits are like blueberries. They need to have enough chill hours to actually produce. This year, we're focusing on root growth though, and not necessarily producing a bunch of plums. So because I just planted this in this 5-gallon container, I'm going to bring him inside. I'm not really worried about it being under a light source for a few days. I just want to protect the root system from not fully freezing. And this is my front yard gigantic peach tree, and it is a low chill hour peach tree. We don't know exactly what variety it is, but I think it's in the Red Haven Mayhaven family. It could also be a Texas Star. Yeah, it could also be that. So the buds are starting to bloom. I just did a big chop on it. But what it does is it typically starts blooming in late February. There's not much I can do to stop it from blooming, but I can make sure that the root system is mulched really, really well, and I do a super deep watering. Now, if it already had blooms on it by the time this frost hit, I would actually be putting a nice misting sprinkler out here as that really hard frost comes in, and using kind of the method that some orchard growers will use to encapsulate open buds with a layer of ice to insulate them when a really, really hard frost comes, just to try to minimize the amount amount of damage. But sometimes there's nothing I can do and I get a really early bloom and then a late hard frost and we don't get peaches that year. And that's the chance you take with low chill hour fruit and growing in the South. Okay, now, if you already planted some young perennials or some white potatoes, that's okay. Use the same method of deeply watering, deeply mulching, moving containers next to your house or onto your porch where they can get more warmth. Consider adding Christmas lights, the incandescent kind, not the LED kind, to get an extra bit of warmth, but keep an eye on fire hazard situations with the way that you decide to set that up. You can even string up some incandescent Christmas lights into a fruit tree that may already be planted in the ground. You can also consider using things like bubble wrap and then layering a blanket around that. The one good factor in this particular weather pattern that's coming in is that today it may be hot. Right now, as I film this, it's hot. Tomorrow it's going to be cooler, and we will have somewhat of a gradual drop over the next few days, and then the hard swing will come in. If today we're 75 and tomorrow we're 16 degrees, you could expect a lot more damage with the plants that are existing in your garden, because just like humans, they need a little bit of time to adapt to extreme change. You have good opportunities to save a lot of the plants in your garden. As we get close enough to spring at this stage, it is worth it to cover the things that you have growing. So don't feel bad about spending some extra time. I hope this video has instilled a little bit of confidence in you to get ready for the upcoming really cold weather that's on its way, because this is what it's like to grow things outdoors in Texas. As long as you can roll with the punches of crazy Texas weather, you shouldn't be afraid to get out there and get growing, because remember, if you never grow, you'll never know.